What would happen if you just throw a turbo onto a normal everyday Corolla? Can the Corolla even hold up to the power of a turbo? Do you even need to upgrade the internals of a Corolla? I mean, because we all know the Corolla is not a performance car, so how will it do with almost doubling the power out of the normal powertrain? Or will it just end up like this? In today's video, we'll talk about how I installed the turbo and what happened afterwards. So let's start all the way back to why I even turboed the Corolla to begin with. Well, it all started because I just started modifying my Corolla and I finally got it to the point where I couldn't do anything else. It was a fully built NA motor that was tuned, everything like that. I think I was making close to like 170, 165, 170 horsepower, and that was really as far as you could go naturally aspirated. So after doing a little digging and searching around, I found a company called turbokits.com, which I have heard about in the past but never actually looked at it. And so I finally went and looked and I saw, what do they have? A 2009 to 13 Corolla 2ZR turbo kit that's specifically for these cars. So I was like, that's perfect. And then I scrolled down and I looked at the price tag, and that's when I just put my phone down and was like, that's way too expensive. The kit itself was about $4,500, $4,500, give or take. And that came with pretty much everything you needed except for the exhaust and a few other little necessities like gauges and stuff like that. After looking at that, it took me about 5-ish months in order to actually place the order because I was very hesitant about making a purchase of $4,500. And so finally bit the bullet and I bought the kit. Within a few days later, the kit arrived at my door and I was like, well, I wasn't expecting it to be so soon. So now I was like, well, it's time to start installing the turbo. Went out and I finally I put the car on jack stands, got rid of the exhaust, and did a couple other little things that were needed, and then I hopped right in to start. So one of the first things I had to do was take off the oil pan because I had to drill and tap, not the oil pan, but I actually had to drill and tap the lower block of the engine because the oil pan on these Corollas is about 2 inches thick, which would not be adequate enough to put a drain line there because the turbo that I have is a gravity fed drain line, so it wouldn't feed because the bolt would have to kind of go underneath it and it wouldn't actually have a nice drop to drain in there. So it is recommended that you drill and tap into the actual block of the car. So finally I removed the oil pan and bit the bullet and drilled a hole straight into my engine. So I had to drill about I think like 5/8 hole or something like that, and then I had to drill it and tap it. And after finally getting over the how nervous I was of doing it, it went fairly easy, but it was just very nerve-wracking to do that, to drill a hole straight into your engine, because once you do that, there's no going back. But yeah, luckily everything went perfectly fine, no leaks, no nothing. And then I hopped on to putting the oil pan back on and getting ready to put everything together on the turbo. So I had to put all the bolts, the oil lines, coolant lines, all the little fittings on the turbo, so that way everything was easy to just throw into the car. But after I did that, I realized how tight of a space it was to actually put that turbo and the header all together. So it took me a good 30-40 minutes to try to put it in there and get everything in there, but finally I was able to drop it in there and it went in super smoothly, and I was able to bolt up the turbo manifold straight onto the car. So, but yeah, it was super relieving after finally getting that on there, because I felt that was probably the worst part of all of it, to do that. So after doing that, I felt very relieved, and it was time to move on to the intercooler portion of the turbo kit. So, and I thought that was going to go a lot easier than I thought, but when you get all these pipes and you have no idea how they go, I looked at a few pictures and was able to get some reference, but there's a lot of like twisting and plumbing of the kit that took a lot longer, and you had to cut away some of the radiator supports and everything like that in order to get it. But finally, after a good few hours of routing all the couplings and intercooling piping, I finally got everything all situated. But yeah, after I got all that done, I started working on all the little things like fuel injectors, vacuum lines, boost gauge, all the electronics of this, which was just a piggyback harness that I had. But once I got all of that, made a big mess with the fuel injectors because I ruined one of the O-rings trying to press it in, so a bunch of fuel got all over, but replaced the O-ring, we were good to go. And so finally it was time to start the car. So I decided to, the instructions on the turbo kit thing say to prime the oil on the turbo, so that way it doesn't starve any oil. So I had all my coils unplugged and everything so the car wouldn't start, and cranked it over a little bit until I saw oil coming into there. And then I hooked up the oil drain line back, and then nervously I was ready to start the car. But luckily I went to go start the car and started no problems. Literally first try, started up, and car started running, and it ran perfectly fine. There was some smoke here and there, but that was all from the oil from the turbos and stuff like that, and the exhaust. But other than that, it was perfectly fine. So finally it was going great from here. So I decided to finally take the car out on a good drive. Everything was going good. I was hitting boost, everything perfectly fine. And this car is freaking crazy. After a few weeks, maybe a month, I realized that I was hitting no boost. I just wasn't sure if the gauge wasn't good or anything like that, but I also realized just feeling the car, it felt like there was not a lot of power anymore. So I looked under a few things, and I just looked on the top of the engine. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, looking at all the vacuum lines and everything, and everything seemed good. And then finally, like a few days later, I got some time to put it in the garage and jack it up, and I was looking, tightening every single coupling that I could, and all of them seemed pretty tight. Then finally the last one I get to, because I started from the top and I routed my way back, was all the way to the turbo. And when I looked at the turbo, the coupling literally had fallen off. So that was my problem there. Put the coupling back on there, tightened up the coupling really good, and went for a test drive. Perfectly fine, hitting about the 6-7 psi boost that it was doing, and running perfectly good. So a few months go by, maybe 3 months or 4 months go by. Finally driving away, then boom, everything ended right there. And it would not be what you guys would think it would be. If you guys follow my channel for a while, you guys would know what happened. But if you guys are new, I was literally just driving along during a normal thunderstorm, rainstorm in Florida, and next thing you know, my car was struck by lightning. So that right there pretty much left me stranded on the side of the road. Luckily, I was perfectly fine, other than like some ringing in my ears because of how loud everything was. But other than that, I was perfectly fine, but the car was not. After looking at the car, I was just thinking, like, I was on the road and it was raining, and I'm just thinking that there was something electrical going wrong. But I just tried to start the car again. Car, all it does is just crank. It doesn't even want to start. And finally, when it stopped raining, I went out and looked at the car. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing seemed fried. Nothing seemed like anything. But as soon as I get out of the car, my ABS pump is constantly running. Even with the key out of the ignition, my ABS is running. My headlights are on. A bunch of other random electrical things are happening, and so I end up getting the car towed to my house. I try to further diagnose it by changing out all the fuses I can, looking at Any other electrical issues that were easily resolvable. I even tried to get a replacement ECU, thinking that the ECU might have been fried, but when I replaced the ECU, the same exact thing happened. So nothing happens, and I could not get the car to start. So then also looking at it, the rear glass was completely shattered. A bunch of like random paint was all flaking off because it got burnt from the electrical, and so on and so forth. So at this point, I decided to let the insurance take it over. They gave me a decent amount of money. It was like $7,500 for the Corolla, but in this market, it was barely enough to buy another car. So I was looking out for another Corolla, and after about 3 or 4 weeks of searching, I finally found this one, which was a 2010 Corolla S with a manual transmission, so exactly what I was looking for. And this car was about $9,000 out the door, so I had to pay a little bit more money to get this car, but it was an upgrade compared to what I had. But ever since then, I just ripped off all my turbo stuff and haven't done anything with the car other than some cosmetic stuff, coilovers and stuff like that. So, but now that I finally have made sure the car is running good, everything seems to be good on the Corolla. It seems like a pretty healthy car after driving it for a while, and so I think I'm ready to finally turbo this car. Like I said, after finally recouping everything and buying additional things that I needed from my last car to this car, and finally it's time to start version 2.